Hello, I'm Alex Iles, a local guide, and today we're here at Newcastle Cathedral, part of Newcastle Diocese, which stretches from the River Tyne to the Scottish borders. It's a beautiful region that has a rich Christian heritage, and the cathedral itself is a landmark of the medieval quarter of the city. The building has a wealth of history that shows how Newcastle transformed from medieval port into an industrial giant and through into the modern day. And the Lantern Tower is a key part of that history. The site where Newcastle Cathedral is today has been an important site for thousands of years. But in the 3rd and the 4th century AD, Christianity expanded across the Roman Empire, and we know that many of the people up here in northern Britain converted to Christianity. We know that as churches were built on this site, eventually St. Nicholas was dedicated as the main patron saint of the church because he became an incredibly popular saint throughout the whole of Europe. He was the patron saint of merchants, sailors, repentant thieves, school children and doctors, quite a portfolio to manage. St. Nicholas is a real historical character. He was a 3rd century bishop of Anatolia, which is in modern day Turkey, and an incredibly kind and generous man. His generosity was then reflected in the business people of medieval merchants who wanted to honour him. And so when they were dedicating a church here in Newcastle, choosing the patron saint of merchants seemed a very good choice, which is then reflected in the architecture of this church with the Lantern Tower directly above us. But we'll come to this slightly later in the story. Newcastle cathedrals mostly from the 13th and 14th century, but we're going to go up to the Lantern Tower today at the top of the cathedral, and that's from the 15th century. It's mostly down to donations from Newcastle merchants such as Roger Thornton and Robert Rhodes. Robert Rhodes also donated the font of the cathedral as well, which is emblazoned with his family's crest. Above it is the font canopy, which is a wonderful example of medieval woodwork. And although it's supposed to be the cover of the font, it doesn't actually line up with the font it's meant to be covering. The reason why is because when they built Mosley Street just to the north of here, the tower of Newcastle Cathedral started leaning first one way, then the other, so they had to build the north and south entrances to stop it from collapsing. Don't worry though, it's perfectly safe and you won't even notice it during your tour today. The tower here as well was also the location where Newcastle's Town Watch used to gather in the past. And when they gathered here, they would assemble, then head out into the streets of Newcastle to patrol and keep law and order. So why don't you grab your helmets, join us today and come on a tour of Newcastle Cathedral Tower, and we'll see what we find on our way. Over 160 narrow steps will take us to the top of this spectacular building, but we'll need to stop halfway to visit a very important place. As we journey up inside and explore the mechanics and hidden gems of this building, let's take a moment to marvel at its structure. The design of the tower itself is a mystery and has been lost to time, but at 60 meters high, it was for the longest period one of the tallest buildings in Newcastle and a defining image of the city. The tower is asymmetrical inside and out. Its medieval construction doesn't allow for perfect equal measurements. Beautiful in its imperfection, the cathedral has a huge amount of character. Welcome to the ringing room. This is where the 14 bells in the bell tower are rung by the cathedral's bell ringers. Now normally 8 bells are rung to produce a full octave, but on special occasions 12 of the bells are rung. Now I didn't know this till recently, but there's a difference between ringing and chiming. A chime is where you pull a rope only 5 to 8 inches to move the bell to produce the noise, whereas ringing the bell is when you pull the rope 20 to 30 foot to produce the sound as the bell goes a full 360 degrees. So we're just going to talk about some of the bells in the bell tower above us. The oldest bell is the Michael bell, which was cast in 1385 in York and joined slightly later by 2 more bells in 1425, and they're just behind me here. Quite poignantly, we also have the Peace bell, which was cast and donated to the cathedral in 1914 to be rung when the First World War ended. On the other hand, we have the Millennium Bell, which was cast and given to the cathedral in 1999 by the Cairns family to be rung joyfully at the turn of the millennium. We then also have Old Major, which is the heaviest bell. He weighs 5 tons and is 6'11" in diameter. Finally, we also have the clock over here, which was the largest clock outside of London when it was installed inside the cathedral's tower. We're going to focus on another feature now in the ringing room, and these are the peal boards. A peal is 5,040 rings of the bell. These are normally done for special occasions.
One of the ones I'd like to point out is the Golden Jubilee, 50 years on the throne of King George III.
Then we've also got commemorative peals for the deaths of King George V and Queen Victoria. But on the other side of the room here, we also have peals to commemorate the Armistice Day, the end of the First World War, and also the Declaration of Peace. Now these are quite special because Newcastle Cathedral was the only cathedral in the United Kingdom to actually manage to get together a team of 12 bell ringers for the Armistice Day.
There is a well-told tale of this tower during the Civil War. The story goes that this ringing room was once a prison.
During the English Civil War, Newcastle sided with King Charles I, and this caused a lot of problems for Oliver Cromwell and Parliament, because Newcastle supplied 60% of London's coal needs. So without Newcastle, London froze. Because of this, Oliver Cromwell and Parliament made a deal with Sir General Leslie Alexander and the Scottish Covenanters to come down and besiege Newcastle. So for 9 months, Newcastle suffered brutal siege and ran out of food and drink. Sir General Leslie Alexander sent messages to Sir John Marley, the Mayor of Newcastle, 3 times asking him to surrender. But Sir John Marley, under the guise of loyalty to King Charles I, refused to surrender. Because of this, the siege became harsher and harsher, and Sir General Leslie Alexander, in an attempt to draw the siege to an easy conclusion, said that unless Sir John Marley surrendered, he would blow up the tower of St Nicholas's with his guns stationed out on Castle Leazes. Because of this, Sir John Marley had to think fast, and what he did was he gathered the Scottish population and imprisoned them within this tower. Now when he imprisoned them, can you imagine what it would have been like for the Scottish population inside this tower? We don't know how many Scots there were, but when they're inside here, it must have been terrifying not knowing when your own people's guns are going to open fire and bring the tower crashing down around you. When this was going on, Sir General Leslie Alexander wasn't going to let this go, and so he ordered the assault on Newcastle. And after 3 days of brutal city fighting, he managed to take the town. But Sir John Marley and his faithful group of soldiers escaped to the castle and held out for a further 3 days until they heard that Tynemouth had fell. When they heard that Tynemouth had fell, that's when he surrendered, and he begged Sir General Leslie Alexander for safety, because the population of Newcastle was so angry at him that they had suffered such a brutal siege when at any point he could have signed a surrender with Sir General Leslie Alexander.
We'll now finish the climb to the top of the tower. It's well worth it when we finally reach the top.
Hello and welcome to the roof of Newcastle Cathedral and to the Lantern Tower.
You'll be rewarded with some of the most spectacular and breathtaking views of this remarkable city and its historic and cultural landmarks, from St James's Park to Central Station, Byker Wall to the Baltic, Gray's Monument to Newcastle's Castle. A panoramic view of Newcastle and Gateshead's history sits before you. You can take in this beautiful scene and marvel at the medieval engineering close-up. I absolutely love showing this amazing building and hope you will join me to explore just some of the wonderful features here. Built in 3 sections, a construction of buttresses, turrets, pillars and pinnacles, its steeple is often referred to as a Scottish crown, in a style commonly copied across the border. 4 golden statues adorn the exterior of the tower. Eve at the northeast, Adam with the apple in the northwest, Aaron dressed as a bishop in the southwest, and David with a harp at the southeast. The choice of these statues is incredibly fitting for the cathedral's mission to be a home for people from all walks of life. The Lantern Tower has been used in the past as a way of guiding people into Newcastle and was probably used as a lighthouse during the Middle Ages. For a long time it was believed the rectangular box above us was the place where the fire would have been housed to guide ships into Newcastle. Recently, archaeologists have studied it and believe there was a brazier hanging down between these vast arches that span over 31 feet and were visible to ships and helped guide them into the city. It was long believed that an iron core kept the arches in place, the stones having been slid over the top of these internal bars. This is not the case, and in fact the arches are solid stone, held together by their weight and design and medieval mortar. To give you an idea how incredible the tower is, if each of the pinnacles could stand on their own without the others, it would weigh 73 tons, and each of the 4 arches are an additional 30 tons. So in total, with the pinnacles and arches without the lantern, it weighs 412 tons, which is 3 times heavier than a Statue of Liberty. Black ironwork ties and lead-cladded oak beams give the Lantern Tower its structural integrity. These huge beams cross diagonally from one corner of the tower to the other. They were bolted together and then secured to the pinnacles by medieval iron, which was wrapped around the pinnacles and connected to the beams. The iron is now thin and corroded by time. The angle pinnacles are remarkable feats of engineering, adorned with elaborate golden weather vanes, octagonal in shape and carved with great skill. Medieval builders would have lifted these from the ground where they had either been shipped in or carved in situ, and then raised them 200 foot, where they were set in place and held together with what we would consider today to be primitive mortar, before finally becoming a part of the tower which has remained in place to this day. Carved into the very sandstone of the building are marks of its makers and visitors, from stonemasons' marks to the graffiti of bell ringers, builders or choristers. We will never know the true identity of these people, but hopefully one day we'll find out their stories. A local historian, Mackenzie, said of Newcastle Cathedral, "This is one of the noblest and most admired structures that adorn our island. It exhibits an originality, boldness and magnificence which render it an architectural prodigy." When it was first unveiled, the tower would have been a fantastic golden yellow in colour of freshly cut sandstone. But even now, soot covered from near on 300 years of intense coal use, it still has a wonderful beauty that I hope you have enjoyed experiencing today. Thank you again for joining us on this tour of Newcastle Cathedral's Lantern Tower, a beacon in the heart of Newcastle. I hope you'll return again to explore more of this amazing cathedral.